Hello, everyone. Let's see who is already here. I saw that Inge is here. If you're around in the chat, let me know, and we'll maybe wait a couple minutes for people to arrive. I just posted a reminder on Reddit and Twitter. And then I will start by making some announcements, which I will also make in blog posts, but I thought you should be the first to know. And then I will try to do something productive with you this Patrons Calling, but I will explain it again in a couple minutes just so people have some time to join. So if you're already joined, say hello in the chat. If you're damn it, Inge, always distracting me. If you are a patron and you want to join as a caller, go to Patreon and check out the patron only link to join the Google Hangouts call. Otherwise, I will also check the chat, of course, for questions. But the more people we have in the call, the better. And since we don't have my de facto co-host Jesse today, because I think it's way too late in Australia now, I would really be happy to see some new faces, or at least hear some new voices. Again, if you have any random questions to start off with, feel free to ask them and I will answer them. No idea how exactly the counter works. How's life? Life is quite cool. I've gotten a lot of interest in the last couple days again from other Rust developers, and I'm kind of struggling to catch up to their interest. What do you mean by that, Inge? Video chat? So you can see me moving when I talk. Also, like always, let's just do some technical stuff. Oh, you have a webcam now. Why didn't you say that, Inge? I will send you the... Do you have a microphone also? Or do you just like... So do you have only a webcam or also a microphone? This is really important because I was waiting to actually talk to you for a long time. It's not connected yet. Don't invent excuses. Connected. Okay, in the meantime, let's just check a couple things. Like always, let's do the stream delay test because this time I used the magic setting and I hope it's lower. So let's try this. I will count to 3, and on 3 I will clap and you just spam something in the chat when you hear it. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's not too bad. Feels a little better than the last times. Then let's try when I share my screen, how that looks. So for example, can you see this text with more or less good resolution? And if I show you this and I draw something here, can you see that more or less? And if that all works, then I think we're good to go. Or did you just see nothing at all? Wait, what's that? Jesse's joining. That's just ridiculous. Okay, yeah, the text is a bit small. If I would actually show you the code, I would zoom it in, of course, but okay, yeah, Inge asked when you have a webcam connected, then you can actually see your face. It's Jesse's decision to not show his face, but absolutely. Yes. Are you sleeping, Jesse? You're like just out of habit connected and you're actually sleeping. Is that the case?
No, I actually woke up 10 minutes ago.
Well, I definitely appreciate it.
It's okay.
So let's see. I hope that some of the guys who needed a weekend to join will actually join. But now I would say let's start the stream. So first, a couple of announcements. I already mentioned some time ago in a blog post that I really want to rely more heavily on this design document, where I kind of try to write down exactly what I want Citybound to be in like natural language, including like all of the inspiration and motivation and decisions that I took. So it becomes much clearer what is still missing, how I want all the different things to be. This would be a resource that I could direct people to if they ask questions, which I get asked very often. And most importantly, if you have a suggestion for the game, this would be a resource where you can actually suggest a change set to this document, and then we can discuss it using the GitHub interface, and we would have like this official way for ideas to get accepted. And because I think what happened very often is that people write these very long texts, they have really good in-depth ideas, and of course they influence my mental model of what I want Citybound to be, but then I maybe don't communicate that again to other people, and it's just very hard to get this kind of one source of truth without like seeing into my brain. And I'm in the process of writing that. I didn't make that much progress, so what I would like to do today actually in this live stream is to just sit down together and maybe in a kind of Q&A fashion with you, try to answer some questions about Citybound, and then writing down how I would want to implement them and why, and capture that in the design document. That's the one announcement, and again, there will be, as soon as there's more progress with that, another whole blog post, and then hopefully we can start using it in this way that I just described. The other big announcement is that now I really feel like the engine is down and most of the complicated things I have a plan for how to do, the economy, the basics are down. There's still like bugs and I need to implement lots of stuff to get it working, but I don't feel right now like there's a lot of research to do. So I actually want to switch to a more, let's say, active phase where I release prototypes much more rapidly. Inge mentioned this, that she would really like to have a prototype more often, and I completely understand that. I think many probably want that, and I want that myself. Just completely steal what, I think probably Jesse, you even made me aware of that, what the prison architect people were doing, where actually every month they released a prototype and then like did a short video of explaining what changed, what's new. And at the same time, like this is what I want to do, and at the same time, it would give me a much more concrete set of goals, set of like midterm to short-term goals that I can work towards and complete. Because I feel like this is often missing for me, that I'm kind of trying to do everything, but if I have something concrete to work towards, it's just much easier for me to make progress and to do everything that is needed to make that work. And I want to start doing that at the end of this month. So the first monthly prototype will be at the end of October. And let me just quickly show you the projects which I created on GitHub for that. So I'm going to share my screen and go to GitHub. And here you can see I just created for the next 4 months. So that in the October 2017 prototype, which will come out in the end of October, no matter what, I really want to try to get the basic grocery economy, so the economy where there exists only money, groceries, hunger, and sleepiness, with little houses working completely. Right now I'm fighting some bugs with pathfinding, I think is the underlying issue. And there's some general cross-platform issues, so there's not too much left to actually get that working. So I'm quite confident that I will be able to deliver this prototype with the intended feature set. Then for November, I want to try to extend the economy to everything that I would expect to see in a rural town, so more different kinds of resources, already some simple resource change and interaction with like abstract neighboring towns. Again, it feels like this increment should be pretty good for a month. Then in December, I want to implement again the UI for zoning, which will be needed for the next step, which is in January, where I want to model housing demand. So actually buildings popping up and disappearing based on the attractivity. And I think this is a fairly good like mid-term plan. And I'm not sure about the last 2 months, December and January, if the scope is too big or too little for a month. We will just see better, I think, as soon as we get there, but this is the idea. And then within each of them, you can see here, if I click on them, I have like all the individual tasks, which ones are really important for me to finish, which ones are like maybe more like bonus or not that important or critical, which ones I'm working on right now and which ones I've already done. And this just already in the like first couple days that I'm using this now feels really, really helpful to this concrete goal of the next monthly prototype. So yeah, at this point, I will just stop explaining that and give you a chance to react. So yeah, let me know what you think. Also, Animal, feel free to unmute your microphone and introduce yourself to everyone. I'm very glad that you joined.
Oh, hey.
And yeah, hi there.
I didn't expect that. I thought I'd just Karen. Listen, my name's Hannibal. I'm also a developer. I'm from Denmark. I think I followed you since you announced your project in the beginning.
Nice.
I've just been giving you like bare minimum what I could give you on the Patreon, just because I was a poor student in the beginning, and now I'm just a poor developer. But
that makes it even more meaningful. It's much appreciated.
But it's great to follow your process, and it's also really great to see my own like follow your process and also your difficulties. And you're definitely like really talented. I could see a lot of the stuff you're doing, but it also seems like you're a perfectionist like me, and you're a person who wants to get it right, and that's what this Patreon thing can do. And I think it's wonderful to see someone who's allowed to do it the right way and not doesn't have to cut too many corners. But of course, you still have to make compromises and things like that. But I find that very, very fascinating to follow. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that's a very nice description of what I feel like Patreon enables, but still at the same time, I mean, this suggestion right now is exactly the other case of the struggle, where I still need to make visual progress and I need to get things done. So this is on me. But that's very, very cool to hear your perspective, and I'm glad to, like Inge said, have an old timer, yet another one, speak to me.
Yeah, it's wonderful, and I'll keep following.
Cool, very cool. So I don't know, Jesse, people in the chat, what do you think about all of that?
Sounds great. Then again, this isn't the first time that we've, put our goals in writing and then had them totally smashed by, but I do think this time is different now that we're not changing languages every 6 months.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, imagine myself remembering all of that, but I feel like I'm planning much smaller things now. So, okay, cool. People seem to just think that it's a good idea. And
yep.
I think, I mean, yeah. kind of the general feeling that I would want is for myself that it's not a super hard requirement that I achieve everything that I wanted for a prototype. Someone else just joined.
Hello.
Without a name. Hello, who are you? Jake.
Yes. Sorry.
Do you also want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jake. I'm just sort of a city sim hobbyist, I guess, but been watching this project since about like week 8 when you were doing the weekly updates.
All right. Another old-timer.
Yeah. But yeah, finally downloaded the Google Hangouts app, so here I am.
Perfect. Very cool to have you as well. So I assume that you also just heard the whole prototype thing.
Yeah. I was watching it on YouTube while I was getting everything downloaded.
All right. So yeah, I will try to get out the first prototype by, I guess, last day of October. I already fixed a couple like Windows issues which people were having. And what this also forces me to do is to always kind of have a version that I could release, because like if I don't manage to finish a big feature until the end of the month, I still like want to force myself to actually release a prototype. So now for a long time, the game actually just didn't run on Windows, and even developers who were downloading the source code couldn't get it to run because there was this one issue. So now I fixed it, and I hope that the monthly releases will help me with that. Yeah, I agree, Tom, Fu, that that it becomes more visual now. This is what I tried to explain with, like, there's not much research needed to be done right now. Yeah, Inge Jones remembers the land parcels. Yeah, that would definitely be part of the whole zoning prototype. So I guess, what did I say, December? And yeah, so I'm sorry for being a little confused or unprepared about the stream maybe, but I would suggest that we actually hop in and have a look at the design document and just pick up pretty much any random point that seems interesting and try to fill it out with more detail. I will first show you what I have so far to give you a better impression. So let me once again share my screen. And right now I have this in the design doc 1 branch, and I have this small explanation here. I will increase the... It's a good site for reading.
Yeah, that's great.
All right, so it starts with like this main page, which explains what the purpose of the design document is. So it should give you a bird's eye overview of Citybound, what it should become and why, and just some notational conventions. And then it already starts describing Citybound and kind of the standard structure for all of the subdocuments. So what is per art and inspiration, and just put a couple things there. There's probably much more which I will add over time, but this kind of gives it a nice feeling. Then the philosophy, what is really the kind of feelings that are important for me about Citybound, and I tried to find a nice formulation for them already. What decisions does this imply? And for example, one of the decisions, which of course I assume most of you know, is that in Citybound you will play in one huge continuous region with several millions of inhabitants. And all the inhabitants are actually unique individuals. And kind of starting from there, I pick up these points in like subtopics of Citybound again and again. And I hope that for someone who's completely new to the project, or who really wants to understand why things are a certain way or will be a certain way, that my reasoning why I do something in a very complicated way, for example, becomes clear from this underlying philosophy and decisions. Then there's often also like implementation philosophy and implementation decisions. Like now, given that we know what we want it to be roughly and what it should look like, how do we actually go about implementing that? What are the kind of strategies that we employ, and what are the kind of decisions, maybe trade-offs and such things that I took to make this possible? And then comes the part with like the subparts, where this is the subparts of the whole. So what do we have? We have an engine, we have a simulated world and player interaction, each of which have several topics. You can see some of the links here are still crossed out. This is where I didn't write anything at all. The other ones typically have, like this one is pretty much empty, so there's not much yet. Transport is, I think, the most filled out one, where, for example, here you can see that I put all kinds of transport, including like rail, airports, whatever, but only road planning exists and is filled out to some degree. Like this one doesn't exist, this should be. And here, for example, this page explains why individual lanes are what I call the atomic unit of road geometry. And you can see it goes pretty far into detail. And I'm trying to build this more or less complete description of what city-bound is. The final part, which you see here, starting again on the main page, is this gameplay and skills section, where I don't remember exactly which Patreon's calling back it was, but I think the third or fourth one, probably Jesse, you will remember, because we were drawing these graphs of a lecture that inspired me about gameplay, where they found this really nice way of thinking about the gameplay of a game by building a hierarchy of skills. And I tried to roughly lay this out for Citybound, where you might have like this overarching skill of building a city. And then in order to be able to do that, you need to have sub-skills, and they become more and more atomic. So the next levels here would be observation and inspection. And then you can see like the different things that you might do to learn about your city, or planning, and then the different ways in which you can do planning, and then execution and finances. And here you can learn about projects and budgeting and taxation and so on. And if we look at this one, again, I didn't fill it out yet, but there's kind of, we drew this picture, and I will see if I can just quickly show this again on screen. Here. See if this works. No, of course it doesn't. Give me a second to reconnect my iPad, because you can think of a skill kind of being like a cycle that, here we go. Like you can think about each skill being a cycle where you have, can you see my cursor, by the way, if I point on something?
Yeah, it's there.
All right. So you have the cycle for each skill where the player has a model of how the game world works. Based on that model, he makes a decision and he takes an action. Based on his actions, something changes in the game. This is like what the engine does. And then because something changes, hopefully these changes will be visible. So this is feedback of all kinds. And this feedback, in fact, if the player notices it, can change his model of thinking about something. And I would like to use this template of thinking about skills to describe every single skill and say, for example, for road planning, what is important in the actions to effects part. For example, that if I draw a road, that it's actually precisely where I draw it. In the effects to feedback section, that I see immediately a preview of the road as it would be created. And then maybe if I connect several roads, that I can actually see that it creates an intersection, and based on this feedback, I can understand the model of intersections which the games have. So I'm not quite sure how exactly that will pan out in detail. We can give it a try for a couple skills later. But I think you get a rough overview of what my intention with this document is. As you can see, it's quite a lot, but I think it will be very, very worthwhile to have all of that written down. So maybe just, yeah, let me know what you think about it. I will quickly stop sharing my screen, and then we can pick one topic. Maybe for now, economy could be interesting, since that's the next thing that will exist in the game, and try to answer questions about that and capture the answers. In the meantime, I see that both Marco and, how do you pronounce that? Hugh, yeah, joined. So nice to have you. Marco is of course a regular on our streams. Hugh, do you want to introduce yourself? In the meantime, let me check the chat. All right, he was just writing something. He's actually William. I don't know if the YouTube streamers can see this text on screen. Hugh, do you have a microphone? All right, William, do you have a microphone? If yes, then it would be super cool if you could actually talk to us. Otherwise, I would recommend you to join just the YouTube live chat next to the video on YouTube, because then I have everyone who's writing something in one window. Whatever you prefer. All right, so thoughts about the document?
And the document looks pretty cool. I logged into the Hangouts because the stream on YouTube was kind of low quality.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, does anyone else have this issue?
It was looking okay to me a few minutes ago before I joined in.
All right.
Might be a local internet issue.
No, because I'm trying this different setting with like low latency, and it said it might buffer more. So yeah, would be really interesting to know also from people in the chat. Stream is okay. All right, perfect. Okay, so any part of what Citibound will be that seems interesting to you to start with, to discuss maybe?
I perhaps have one question, open question.
Yeah.
About skills, and I was zoning a little bit out when you were going through the one that was called gameplay and skills, so I might be completely off here.
No problem.
When you're talking about skills, are you talking about as skills as a gameplay mechanic, like you have to unlock a skill and there's specific?
No. I mean actual like abilities that the player has to learn to effectively play the game. Like
player
yeah.
skill. Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah,
because
curve.
That's a big important distinction.
Yeah, of course. And I'm sorry for not being precise there enough. I kind of tend to forget that there's these like things that are explicitly called skills in games. But I just really like this way of thinking about what the player does when playing a game is actually learning a bunch of skills. And by looking at these skills as like skills which are composed into bigger skills, you can actually understand your game very well.
Yeah, I agree. That's great. Good to hear that.
I think if we had to choose between starting with the economy and starting with transport, I mean, transport's already got plenty written about it, and everyone always loves to talk about transport. Yeah. So let's do the hard one. Let's do the economy.
Yeah, let's go for it. And we could actually start. Okay, this will be slightly tricky with. I will just try to, from time to time, switch back to the chat. I hear you guys anyways, and I will just use the editor directly here on GitHub, even though that will make some people crazy who have notifications enabled, but that's what it costs to be a Citibound follower. All right, so economy and household behavior. I originally called this page just economy, but recently I noticed a couple times that, like, when I think about economy, of course, it's like, for me, it's very natural to understand that this refers to the like microscopic interactions of households, whereas for most people, maybe that's just some like high-level statistics. So I really wanted to make clear that economy in Citibound is actually about the behavior of the individual households. Interestingly, a friend actually sent me this talk, and if you like to hear about microeconomy, you can check it out, where an economist argues that kind of all of our high-level economic models are garbage, and that we should really use computers much more heavily and exactly look at interactions between individual households and consider also very tiny markets and how they evolve. So this kind of gave me confidence that I'm doing something that makes sense there. So yeah, it all starts with all macroeconomic behaviors arise from interactions of individual households, where households mean either families or companies. And then within a family or within a company, each member has both selfish goals and shared goals. And in their daily routine, they try to trade these two off. So, and there's one important part here in the implementation decisions, which I misspelled apparently. So we can start right with that. Is this still big enough like this?
Yep.
All right, perfect.
I can read it on my phone.
Not bad. So in the game I use what's called resources, and these can be both tangible goods, so for example groceries, wood, money, as well as intangible ones, such as awakeness or hunger or something like that. And one important point which I didn't add, for example, is that all of these are measured using scalar values. And right now they can be, I will write down what the game implements right now. And then, for example, because there has already been some discussion on it, we can later make a change request and discuss something that we might want to change about that. So all of these are measured using scalar values from -infinity to infinity. But these values represent how well someone is doing on this resource, not necessarily some kind of absolute amount of how much they have in stock. The motivation behind that is to give us some leeway into balancing the economy. So I will try to put this maybe in implementation philosophy, having to rely on absolute values makes balancing very hard, and most importantly, it amplifies bugs and makes the system potentially very unstable. I'm not quite sure how good of an idea it is to type and talk at the same time. It might be very annoying for you people. So let me think. Otherwise, I can also first say something and then quickly write it down. Maybe while you're thinking about it, let me know how you prefer. And feel free to just interrupt me with any comments that you already have, maybe.
Have we discussed any prerequisites or requirements about households and like the properties they occupy or whatever?
What exactly do you mean by that?
So like Tom Fu is suggesting in the YouTube chat, can companies have more than one building, and how would those multiple buildings interact with each other if they're part of the same entity?
That's a good question. And I will, so.
Would that ultimately fall into zoning, do you think?
I mean, the question is it of relevance that these different buildings have different stockpiles, for example, or would it be fine with just one company having different buildings and kind of abstractly sharing a bunch of resources? And I assume that especially for stuff like logistics, it would actually be relevant which resources are in which building, even for one company.
I suppose it depends on whether you want to add that additional layer of complexity. Like, the city could be a set of mom and pop shops, and the logistics are supplied by the city as a whole from warehouses locally. Or we could have like corporations, like 3 different supermarket chains that handle their own logistics from their own individual warehouses. So it seems to me it would be an added layer of complexity on top of the base level of mom and pop shops.
Yeah,
So,
or
yeah.
if all supermarkets are part of a franchise, then technically all of those supermarkets are part of the same company, but they're different buildings. And you'd want the inventories of each of those supermarkets to be independent.
Okay, so since I already said that I definitely even want something as complicated as pure logistics companies to exist, I think that the only choice we really have is to have resources per building. So I will write this down here in implementation decisions. I'm not quite sure what the philosophy behind that is yet, but that then means that all the individual, for example, need to have some way to cooperate on a higher level and share, for example, money as a resource. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So one household and its associated resources are always tied to one specific building or location. If this is one, how can you call it a seat of a company in English, or how would you call it? Or one location of a larger company, there needs to be some way of cooperation between different locations. And I will mark this. I have this notation here where I put there the red question mark emoji to represent that this is something that doesn't have an answer yet. Maybe we will even invent it today, but for now I will write it down like this. So, okay, the philosophy or the motivation behind that is, it's actually not just an implementation philosophy, but the base philosophy that like effects of locality, where the location matters, should be very important to the point that we can have even logistics companies, because
It introduces new types of gameplay that haven't existed in City Sims before.
what exactly do you mean by that?
So,
you as a player have to understand
well, at a corporate level, yeah, it lets supermarket chains exist in independence. It lets entire industries exist that we haven't had before, like logistics or postage, like you mentioned. And in a residential context, it means you can have landlords.
Yeah.
You can have rental properties, and you can have a real estate market.
Yeah, true. So, okay, you mentioned with the real estate market actually already something else, which I also definitely want to include. Let me just try to get like the motivation and the decision straight. So we want to have local effects, and I think I will maybe write some things not that perfect yet and then go over everything after the live stream and formulate it nicer. Let's just keep the most important stuff. Have local effects and, I don't know, importance of location, enabling all kinds of logistics, and I will call it distributed industries of some shape or form. And then this explains why we have this decision. And then about, I wasn't quite sure how, for you, Jesse, the real estate market was related to that.
If you have a landlord that owns multiple properties,
okay,
then yeah, that's where it would tie in.
Okay, and why do we want to have a real estate market in the first place? Because it's also a huge factor in shaping a city, actually, right?
Absolutely.
The question of the prevalence or the existence of a government actor, I suppose, also could interfere or could relate to this question, because if you have these franchises, or if you have these actors who are omnipresent or are present in multiple places, perhaps any design for a government actor would also fit into that architecture.
So you're talking about the interaction between the city and like larger companies or something like that?
I'm thinking in terms of how you're designing the game is if you are to create a government, or if there's some sort of government actor, I suppose the player is some sort of mayor or has an economy and perhaps also has properties or has ownership over multiple properties. Maybe that design has to be implemented somehow. Maybe that could be utilized also for companies, or
So you mean because the city can own some things, we have this ownership model anyways, and this is also how like the city could sell real estate to a company, or is it more than that?
Yeah.
All right.
And how government offices can also exist as like pseudo businesses and operate on the same rules as businesses. So you could have the taxation office who works
Yeah.
like this, or a government post office, or I don't know, other government offices.
Okay, we'll try to estate market with ownership and businesses, including city government ownership. Again, this sounds like a couple related things kind of muddled together, but I will go over it and try to separate it out. I think for now it's important that we have it. Okay. Anything else on this level that piques your interest? As you can see here, the subparts of that would be families, businesses, neighboring cities, markets. And you can see that here, I even already included the housing market. I will probably rename it as real estate market. All right. I don't know, Marco, I don't know how active you're participating, but you always have a lot of thoughts on economy. Do you feel like there's anything that should be included on this high level or that should be clarified? And let me check the chat quickly.
Oh, sorry, I was distracted.
No
So
problem.
you're talking about logistics and having one company have multiple locations?
Not necessarily anymore, just anything in the economy of Citibound that feels like it should be an important underlying philosophy, or yeah, just on the highest level.
Have you already talked about resource chains yet?
No, and
Yeah, there we go.
yeah, this is why I asked you. And oh, Jagger DeLeo actually said something that for me is so obvious that I almost wouldn't write it down, but it's very important, that resources shouldn't be able to teleport things. Everything that needs to move physically in real life actually also needs to move there. So this actually relates to this point here. And then, Marco, we will come back to the resource change and think about a good way where we could include that. So resources that have to be physically, or let's even be stricter and say all resources in real life have to also be moved in Citibound. And this then explains why we have full logistics and so on.
I think it's important to be modeling all resources, whether they're tangible goods or intangible, like hunger or money, or even further intangible, like social capital, like we've discussed before.
So this is kind of the philosophy behind this point.
Yeah.
Why do we want to do that? Because not only the exchange of physical goods influences the decision making of households, but intangible, how would you call them? resources?
Yeah.
Or I will say again, psychological, physiological, and maybe to give this social capital a special place. Already mentioned social metrics, I call it, play an equally, if not more, important role. And then this ties in nicely with this. All right, great. I have to say this is going great. Again, I apologize if it's kind of annoying to listen to that. But yeah, I think we're making some good progress. What does Bill Brin write about?
So he's Will or Hugh from
Oh, okay.
the chat.
Well, yes, sure. Actual companies plan these things for years, but then again, in Citibound, you kind of observe the effects that span several years. So yeah, I think I like Inge just fighting with him.
Fight.
The game won't run well. I also didn't think that you could simulate every single car, but you can, and I think this is simpler. Okay, so where do resource chains tie into that? The philosophy is that I guess 99% of things that we consume are actually not raw resources, right? But somehow processed. So the dependencies between resource production also plays a huge role, not just in shaping industries, but conversely also shaping the city. Is that how you would put it, Marco?
That's a good way of putting it.
All right. Consumed resources and actually also services depend on complex chains of, how do you say that? Let's say earlier resources. These resource chains, I would actually rather call them trees, I think. Are at the core of shaping industries, the required, and thus also a city. I'll put it like this.
Sounds good.
And then what are the decisions because of that? So that, I mean, one decision could be that we don't magically create any kind of complex resource, but it always has to be built from its component parts. So we could be as strict as saying all complex resources can only be either created or created from its component parts.
That sounds good. You don't want to have like a car tree.
Yeah.
like a farm for cars.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
in
I
a
mean-
way, it's almost like a crafting system, but abstracted
Exactly.
behind the game code.
And that's I guess an implementation decision, like crafting recipes to determine both how resources combine, at which costs, and which businesses do that.
Can I intercept with a comment here?
Of course.
I think this part of it is really interesting, and especially if you have some sort of ability to follow the journey of a particular resource, and especially like perhaps if a resource manages to find a cycle or cyclical journeys, or if they somehow have sort of a starting point and an end point, is really interesting. And I also think it could also be really powerful, because I was thinking about this actually earlier today, because I came home from the store, and every piece of food that I bought, every fruit, every lettuce, also had plastic wrapped around. So resources that we don't usually consider component or being created from multiple components often are, but we filter it out. We don't think about these things. And if Citibound could heighten that awareness, would be really wonderful and really cool.
I completely agree, and I would suggest first that we take a small 5-minute break, and when we come back, we actually think, after having thought about all of this, about the skills that a player might need to understand such things, and for example, what the gameplay implication of the realization that you had after the shop might be. Like, how does that help you to create a more effective city or detect problems with your existing city? So let me stop screen sharing, read the chat. Yeah, I mean, Ilibrin, you're right, or William, I guess, that there's a lot of many subtle factors, and I think we will come back to that when we discuss maybe housing demand or how companies choose locations.
I suspect
But
that,
yeah.
I mean, a lot of his issues stem from, he thinks that modeling complex corporate decisions sounds like too much work for a city sim game to do. But if we're modeling household decisions and household ambitions, like I want to buy this new TV, I want to move to a nicer neighborhood, then extrapolating that decision matrix into a corporate setting is actually no challenge at all, and fits with the end model that you have in mind.
Yeah, and kind of yeah, underlining that, and also what Jagger Leo says is that basically very simple rules can go very far, producing like the kinds of effects that you would expect from highly complicated corporate decisions using just a few simple rules. Okay, so let's take a break. Let's say we will be back at the full hour, and then we will just continue with that. All right? See you then. And we're back. Let's give everyone a couple seconds to arrive. All right, Jesse, how late is it for you now?
3 in the morning.
True dedication.
Wow.
It's worth it.
Okay, so I unfortunately don't know who raised the point of the plastic wrap because I just heard the voice. Was it Hannibal or Jake?
Hannibal.
All right.
I believe it was
So-
Hannibal.
Well, let's see what he believed. All right. If you need another minute, I will give you another minute, but it would be really interesting, and I think we can think about that all together. How does this awareness of resource chains become relevant for the gameplay of building a city? Like, for me, it would definitely tie into like zoning and thinking about the role that you want your city to have compared to like other cities which it might trade with. But what is the skill there?
The character of the city is the sum of its component industries, I think. If you have a city that's heavily agricultural, that determines the character of the city by the content of the buildings inside it. If it's a steel-making city, that's different. If it's heavily industrial on manufacturing, that's different. If it's a lot of offices, that's different. And as those balances change over the time, the character of your city changes as it grows.
All right, I will just write this down verbatim because I think it's a great point. So, okay, let me open the main page in parallel because I kind of liked this maybe high-level structure of dividing the skills. And then what else do we have? So now we could think about skills that would fall into these rough categories related to that. So observation and inspection would definitely be like inspecting resource change, I get resource chains. Where you might look at inspect all consumers of the products of the business and inspect all the source producers of input products of a business. Like, this is something that I could actually imagine the player to do and learn something from that. What do you think?
Yeah, I suppose resources, a resource has a lifetime, or it has a journey, and that journey consists of, I suppose, a point of production, or at some point it's created or extracted, and then it's transported perhaps once, perhaps multiple times, and then it has to be disposed or destroyed. And I suppose, and I think one of the points is some resources are never destroyed, perhaps because they're very hard to destroy, or because there isn't the necessary infrastructure to destroy it. So it just accumulates unless someone figures out how to reuse it or to employ it elsewhere. So there are these questions, but I'm not sure how one would implement them. And but there could be some conflicts, or that you could find some areas where you present the player with some interesting conflicts of, do I create a very efficient way of destroying it, or do I think smartly about it and recycle, and And
Yeah.
the concept of recycling, of course, becomes very cool because you can perhaps actually find cycles. You have to figure out what are the cycles and how do I get things back into those cycles.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so yeah, that's one really cool instance where you can use this to learn something and to improve not just like the logistics within your city, but actually like its environmental effects and so on. But one question that I have, I mean, all of these 3 points that I wrote down now are about like one specific product or one specific business.
Could
How
you
would you
change your screen?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's really hard for you to follow me if you don't see that. So I just wrote down inspecting resource change as an instance of observation and inspection in general, and then you could inspect all consumers of the products of a business. Inversely, you could inspect all the source producers of input resources of a business. Or you could do what was just suggested, that you inspect the full journey or life cycle of a product, including it becoming waste or whatever. And these all sound informative and meaningful, but they're all about single businesses or resources. So how would you imagine maybe seeing larger patterns of product flow or something like that? Or how would that be meaningful? Because as you said, Jesse, the city is shaped by the sum of all of that. So how do you start to see either the sum or some aggregated subparts of that?
As a visual feedback, I mean, like almost as a character thing, the architectural influence of different industries would be different. So as they effectively change in the background, then the character of the city as an architectural point of view changes. That would be my contention. As for actually perceiving and understanding the minutiae of those supply chains, you could break them down into classes of resources.
Mhm.
So all agricultural goods would be grouped together, all processed industrial goods would be grouped together, and that might be a simpler way of perceiving where the shortfalls lie in your economy.
Okay, and then what would you exactly see per group? Like what is actually displayed? Just trying to...
That might let you then look at businesses that have surpluses in stock and businesses that have deficits in stock. So you can see whether there's issues in supply chain or whether there's issues in supply or whatever that else there may be. But then the question becomes, as a player, are you supposed to manage those supply chains, or are they supposed to work flawlessly anyway? That the best way to improve it would be to adjust your transport system or your zoning or another
Exactly,
system.
and this is like, I will put this down here, like the player is not supposed to manage like supply, demand, resource chains, but to enable them to be as effective as possible through the means of infrastructure planning and zoning, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Zoning / governance.
So in a way, these skills are a useful debug tool or a useful introspective into the function of the city, but they shouldn't be used directly to plan a city.
Yeah, and another point, I mean, in real life, you don't really have access to this amount of detail, right?
Yeah, because then it becomes a business management game for 1,000 businesses inside your city rather than a city building game.
So this is why, I mean, so just for now, I will call this like God mode knowledge.
Yep.
Would be all of these.
omniscient.
Where is the only like realistic knowledge would be that. I mean, you could probably like directly show all businesses of a specific resource category, or like precise resource category. Like as the mayor, you can find out all the companies who produce exactly bananas or whatever. That's something that you can do, and that's something that tells you something. Probably the business owners won't tell you what exactly their stockpiles are. They might want to tell you how well they're doing or what their wishes are. Is the way that I would approach it if I would want to go for realistic knowledge, which I think I want to do, but I think I want to hear all of your opinions on that. And I will check the chat as well.
I have an idea. How about, like, when you click on a certain store, you can then click a button to see, like, what the supply chains for that store is. So if it's just like a farmer's market, it just shows you the farms for that store. And then you can click another button to show you all the stores and all of the same category, like all the farmers markets and all the grocery stores, and then all of their suppliers. And then maybe like colorize the vehicles that transport the resources while making everything else like white or gray.
So like mostly focusing on all the businesses involved and the paths between them, right?
I think that's a really great idea that you choose a node in the giant web that is the economy, and you can look at what interacts with that particular node of the web. And that would be really helpful for debugging, an individual business that happens to be failing. But it's also more than a gameplay tool. It's an education tool for understanding how these complex systems interact with each other at a macro level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like that. So all related nodes and the economic network of one particular business, including paths. I feel like a lot of what we're writing down here in skills now is actually stuff that should also be further up in the description. But again, I will go through it later and copy the parts and make sure it's more clean. So, okay, this is kind of what you can do, and then what can you learn from that? So it's like infer bottlenecks or just problems by showing all related nodes. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Plus the just additional nice side effect of education. Okay, so now we talked a lot about businesses and resource chains. I mean, all of this also applies to family households. And you might actually, by clicking on a family home, you might see like where they work, where they get their groceries from, where they like to go to the park or cinema or whatever. It would just be more or less the same, right? Or do we need something additional to understand families, or what is interesting about families?
No, ideally, I think you'd want to be able to use the same system.
Yeah, so if you have an individual who has a favorite coffee shop, then you could say that the coffee shop is a related node.
Yeah, this goes in the direction. This goes in the direction of something that someone in the chat just mentioned, which I lost because it's moving on so quickly, about the diversity of consumer goods, that it's actually people like if they have like 3 different supermarkets that they could go to, or 3 different coffee shops, whereas companies typically have like one source producer which they even have a contract with. So I think this feels kind of like the only kind of difference between families and businesses in this regard, that the family might have different different sources for the same resource. Then again, the way it's implemented right now is just that there's one favorite for everything, and only if that favorite fails to deliver, the family chooses, or the individual member chooses, a new favorite. So I think for now we can use these tools for both businesses and families alike.
I think another major difference between homes and businesses is that residential family groups, their primary goal would be happiness, and I mean, money might be a tool in achieving happiness.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas businesses, their primary goal is making money, and happiness might be a tool in making money. Right?
Yes.
It's quite poetic.
Yeah, it is quite poetic. And that is the case in the game. Like, they just have different, well, success metrics for how they sum up all the resources and determine what to do next. Where actually it's not that simple. Like, there isn't a single happiness metric, but actually already the families, depending on the time of day, have different goals. Where, except if you're Jesse, if you're tired, you go to bed, and you don't care that you need to work, and you don't care that you should maybe buy some groceries, but then in the morning you really just out of habit feel like going to work, or maybe you don't, but you feel the societal pressure. And this already works this way, and like after fixing some bugs now, I actually got this working for the first time, where people go through several daily cycles of doing everything and kind of actually managing to balance their different needs, like money, awakeness, and hunger. So, and I feel like for families, there should be this God mode style knowledge of how they're doing. Or yeah, I'm conflicted. I feel, and I feel like this is something that we can discuss now, maybe. Like here, this inspect the surplus or deficits is exactly like inspecting the resources of a family. Should the player be able to do that? It's kind of unrealistic. And I can't invent for all of these different things how that would become visible indirectly or in a realistic manner. Like, okay, if people are really doing bad, they just move out of the city, but you won't really know why. Then again, probably in real life, if people move away as from the viewpoint of the city, you won't know why. So I'm a bit conflicted. What do you guys think?
Maybe have it like as a debug tool.
Yes, but not for the player at all.
Citybound tried to resolve that by having Chirpy as a
You
live
mean,
Twitter feed of the citizens.
I love you mixing up Skylands and Citybound, by the way.
Did I just say Citybound?
Yeah, I was like, whoa, I didn't know that. Yeah, and I was thinking about something like that, but not as annoying. But I'm not sure how to make it less annoying.
Design goals. Chirpy, but less annoying.
Yeah.
I enjoyed SimCity 4, where they had a little gimmick where you could put in your little Sims that are like sample citizens that exist in the city, and you can like track their daily lives. So maybe like if a citizen gets like unhappy, decides to leave the city or whatever, you have that like logged in some feed, like a Chirpy feed, but one that doesn't like bother you every 5 seconds.
Yeah, this already goes into like the proposed solutions that I would have, where, for example, just for debugging purposes right now, I implemented this event log per family. But something like a simpler version of that might be interesting to see when you actually want to inspect a family, not like as a constant feed. I think this is actually the only annoying aspect of Chirpy, where you could somehow encode all of this godmod style knowledge as like more natural sounding opinions or language if you inspect individual businesses or citizens, who might tell you like, it's really annoying that there's no park close by. But you only find that out when you actually inspect them. And same for businesses, like we really need better access to like raw wood here and we don't have it. What do you think?
I feel like this also like touches into the possibility of getting into some of the darker aspects of city life. For example, if there's no stores nearby and there's a food desert, do people start to starve? Or if people are thrown out at work, do they become homeless? Like the topics that aren't really talked about in some of the more lighthearted city sims.
Yeah, I mean that would be the extreme consequence, and I think just to capture this, I will quickly. I wish I could switch faster between this. I will write this down here under realistic knowledge. For example, infer causes of homelessness. That's where the homeless is like one extreme visual signal for a player that something went horribly wrong. And then maybe if you inspect them, you can find out their story, like what happened. There's a kind of implementation problem with that I'm not sure that I can capture like history of all of the sims all of the time, just because that would be way too much information. But then again, history exactly tells you kind of complicated causality chains, like, okay, first he lost his job, then also this happened, and he couldn't find a new job, and just everything kind of spiraled out of control. He became sick, didn't have time to go to the doctor. And I think by kind of going a little bit of the SimCity route of having maybe like every 100th citizen is a citizen that is allowed to take more storage space and actually captures all of its history, and then you can inspect those. Yeah, but otherwise they behave exactly the same way, just that you have some more information about them. I think that would be really interesting.
It's basically like a subset of citizens that do debug logging for you.
Yeah.
Jagger has an excellent point. Does that mean that we now need to consider park benches as homes?
Yeah.
This
Why
question, happiness, is always a little weird, and it's always something that's been a little weird when playing like simulation games, like The Sims or city games, like because it's such a subjective thing. You've got a tribe somewhere in the Amazon where people have a life expectancy of like 50, and they don't have any toilet facilities, and it's raining all the time. There's tigers everywhere, but they're like measurably more happy than some suburban family, So I don't know how that could be modeled, or if it even should be modeled. But is that something you put any thought into, like this subject?
Yeah, I mean that's the sorry.
No, sorry, keep going. Yeah.
That's the reason why I kind of reject having this like calculated overall happiness metric and only have like all of the individual motivations like hunger, sleepiness, desire for like social contact, desire for entertainment or whatever. And people just kind of try to keep them balanced, and they might be more or less important in different points in time. And you can kind of judge how fulfilled or complete a life of someone is to see how well they're doing on all of these. But there's not one like reduced happiness measure.
Right, and you could also have, of course, different requirements for different people.
Yeah, exactly.
Change, and if you get used to a high carbohydrate diet, then your happiness requirements change because you've changed your lifestyle, or like there's some really interesting and also like perhaps super unnecessary things you could explore there.
Okay, I will capture this just because we brought it up a couple times now. That I guess this would belong into the families page, and I will probably move it there, but I'll put it here now. Like, there's no central happiness metric, but only individual diverse motivations that vary both over time as well as from person to person. And one can only get a rough overview of how well someone is doing by looking at all of them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So, coming back to the God mode style knowledge, I feel like deciding. Okay, I feel like deciding, but I don't know what to decide. So let's discuss it some more. We just mentioned that having the history is interesting both in the extreme cases of someone like either moving out of the city or becoming homeless or whatever. But I think it's also interesting in people that are doing just kind of all right. And it's a kind of time extended view of the other businesses which they interact with. Like, on the one hand, you want to know in general which other businesses or families does this person interact with, but then also how did this person's day look like? Where did they have to travel in the morning? Where did they have to travel in the evening? Again, because this is hugely important for infrastructure planning. And I would love to just give a lot of this information in an omniscient kind of way to the player. Is there a good argument against that, or is there like an excuse that actually really cities do have access to some information like this? I would assume that they do it in the form of polls. Just let me know what maybe you have some ideas or know something that I don't about that.
I think that showing all the information of every person is a bad idea. That's information overload. I think
Yeah.
we'd need a carefully constructed UI to feed only the relevant information to the player at each time. Talking about how data visualization of individual thoughts can be used to help game-making decisions, which I think is the goal here.
Yeah.
There's no game that does that better than the original Roller Coaster Tycoon.
Yes.
The way you figured out whether you were doing well or bad in that game was by using the fantastic toolbar of grouping everyone's thoughts together and then ranking them by most common thought to perceive what was the biggest issues in your park, and then you could perceive where exactly in your park were those individuals thinking. So you kind of got a heat map of where thoughts were coming from as well. You could look at an individual and look at their top 3 most relevant thoughts, that as well as all the underlying emotions that created those thoughts.
That sounds pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Why not to just completely steal that and do it even better? So, all right, let's add a couple skills related to that. And I mean, it's Roller Coaster Tycoon represents it as thoughts, right? But it's kind of
What do you mean represented which as dots? Represented which as dots?
No, as thoughts, sorry.
Thoughts, yeah.
Where like people would usually not mention their opinion to the park authority. But I guess that's a level of unrealism that is completely fine. Like, I'm just, because this document is such a like defining my principles kind of deal, I just want to be really precise there in to allow. So, but in a way it feels like being able to read their opinions, which they might tell me if they ask them, feels less God mode like than being able to inspect what they have in their fridge, maybe.
I don't think we need to know what anyone has in their fridge.
I feel like the intuition should perhaps be reversed. Instead of consciously thinking of what we should allow the player to see, make conscious decisions about why we would want to prevent the player from seeing something. And besides that, it's just a matter of making a usable UI to make that information attainable.
Okay, yeah, to just ask you a question again, why would we want to hide something? I mean, my argument so far, yeah, information overload, of course. But the argument there is given enough and good enough UI and aggregation and so on, this should be manageable. It's more a question of like, should you even be able to see this information, and in which cases not? And my argument so far has only been some kind of token realism, which I'm not that convinced of myself. Maybe, do you have any good reasons to not show something?
What about crime information? Do you want someone's thoughts to be, I'm going to commit a crime tonight? Or would you hide that deliberately, just like the police force and the real government wouldn't know?
I mean, it's not like you can take any action as a player, and it's more...
I mean, you could maybe delete the citizen. Like, I don't know, say you look at someone and it's like, I'm going to blow up the city center tonight, like I'm a terrorist. Then you just seal off their home, put a wall around it, put 5 police stations around the home.
I mean, this brings us back to the whole lightheartedness of city building sims, but...
Well, I was thinking...
Sorry.
I was thinking that Monte Cristo City Life and the Glassbox SimCity of 2013, they both had protests. Like, they go, like, citizens will go to your city hall when things are really bad.
So I definitely want to have them, because that's like a super realistic and explicit way of getting the opinion of people. And I think like all of these extreme signals are very obvious that they should be in the game, and how you learn from them and so on, because that's literally how in reality people communicate with their city. But what about the more subtle opinions and like small problems before they become big problems? I mean, this is what all the God mode style knowledge would be about, right?
I think that it is reasonable to inspect an individual really closely. I don't think it's unrealistic for a government to approach individuals and, you know, ask them heaps of information about their life to get better. I mean, companies do that all the time.
Yeah.
And often they're willing to do that.
It also it speaks to the question of whether deducing information is a skill that is important to the game, or if that is a part of the gameplay, whether or not your ability to deduct certain types of information from less precise types of information is somehow part of what the challenge is.
I mean, I thought so, definitely. And just as a suggestion of, like, for example, deducing industry from the architectural style, or like deducing how well a neighborhood is doing by looking if the buildings look broken. This is something that I definitely enjoy about existing city building games. And I think the two can be married in the way that these kind of very obvious visual signals or extreme visual signals can give you a clear, direct trigger to investigate. And then you can look at individuals with God mode style knowledge to actually understand the problem better and in more detail.
Yep.
You could also treat it as a gameplay mechanic, as in you could tie the power to gain information as sort of a limited resource. Say you have to invest in survey data, or you that it could be some sort of thing you need to acquire, that this information becomes a resource.
Yeah, this is what I was hinting at earlier when I asked about surveys.
Sorry.
No, and it's good that you bring it back up because I almost forgot it. Like, yes, that sounds really cool. On the other hand, I have this, like, one of the main goals of SimCity, there we go, of Citybound is actually providing more and better feedback for what you're doing in your city, and then like kind of artificially forcing you to spend the resource of investigation would go pretty much directly against that.
That's how we monetize the game, DLC or microtransactions.
You want to really know why your city goes to shit? Why? Well, buy the survey DLC. It's only $1 for asking 100 citizens.
I don't mind there being this utopian almost levels of access to information, because it's also part of this. I think with any city builder, there's this aspect of what happens when you go back to your real city and you look at it. And I wouldn't mind you going back to the real city and feeling a deficit of information, or going back and saying, okay, wow, one of our big problems is that we don't know what's going on. We need the data first.
All right. You just convinced me right there, actually.
Yeah, I'd argue actually that that's an inherent advantage in any simulation, like even like in physics. Like, you run a simulation because there are things about the real world that you can't know, but you can know anything and everything about your computer simulation and go back and learn something about the real world from that.
I will try to capture this here in philosophy. So, even though amount of information presented in the game might go way beyond realistically knowable things, the fact or this contrast in availability of information compared to the real world has an educational and almost call to action aspect to it, which I really like.
Well, I want to provide a small counterpoint, because you could also argue that if part of the gameplay is to acquire or work to acquire that information, then you could also gain appreciation for the importance of data and the importance of data acquisition.
All right, can we invent a non-annoying way to have to work for this information and to give it value like that? Like, that's always, if we manage to give it value and still not make it annoying, this would be the ideal case.
I think a good mediator of the most critical pieces of information has always been through city advisors. And I liked SimCity 4's implementation of that when there's the crisis, they pop up in your face screaming at you with the red text background. And when otherwise, you can always just go to the advisor panel, click on them, and see exactly what their major concerns are.
I do kind of like the idea, but I feel like I have to mention that when I was playing that old SimCity, I would turn off the advisors and just go to the data panels to see what was actually going
on.
And maybe to a point, it's just that we're catering to different people's differing play styles. So maybe
Yeah,
it's okay
definitely.
to have both ways.
And maybe one point regarding the cost of investigation. I mean, Jesse, you mentioned it as information overload. You can't possibly inspect every single citizen. Like, you can in the game if you wanted to, but you don't have the time to. So maybe the resource that detailed investigation costs is just your focus and your time and what you choose to prioritize. And maybe that's enough. What do you think?
Yeah, well, in Rollercoaster Tycoon, I don't know about you guys, but I only ever looked at an individual when, like, just for the fun of it, to view
Yeah,
them
true.
as a character that was in my park, and they had a name, they had a personality, they were doing fun things. I followed them around for a while. I left them alone. That was the only function as a way of humanizing the individual, making them as a little character. All of the actual decision making went through the aggregated data.
Mhm. I will write this down with a question mark. So actual in the following mostly provides like story or world building. Decisions are made based on aggregates. I mean, it would be cool if we could learn something even from just looking at an individual. But I agree that the main motivation to look at an individual is just this, hey, I want to like have this feeling of having this single person which is unique and so on.
It also, looking at the person is a good way of like a lens through which you can view the world. Like the only vantage point the player often gets is this God mode from the very top down, looking at things. You look at the individual and you can see the world from their point of view through the game.
Yes. Always great to have people who speak in sentences which I can just write down verbatim. Let me check the chat, which is quite active today.
Everything's
Yeah.
quite active today. This is a great time slot.
I'm surprised to hear you say that, but all right, so a common theme about the advisors in SimCity were that they kind of only started screaming when you already were aware of it. You can take a macro look at how things are doing based on building quality. Yeah, this is what I meant earlier, like that maybe the city itself organically gives you a good overview, maybe together with data maps, which might then inspire you to investigate in detail. I think this is a good way of thinking about it. So overall, macro appearance of the city hints at general issues which might inspire you to investigate in detail. By the way, let me know what you think, but I feel like we're doing some really weird and awesome kind of collaborative game design right there, just by editing a text document, which was a little bit what I hoped for, but it feels like we're discussing much more in a lot of more sophistication than I expected.
Well, this is
That's
fun
exactly what I was expecting.
adding a lot of things.
Sorry?
The fun aspect of game design when you're adding all the things to the design document. The painful part is when you have to take things away.
Yeah. It doesn't feel that painful, or I'm not scared of taking stuff away, because these are all things which I wanted to do anyways, and it feels like now we're finally relating them to each other in a way that will actually allow me to condense it down to a couple key mechanics that make all of that possible. Okay. We've gone for quite some while. I would suggest that, yeah, let's slowly come to an end. Maybe if there's any points about economy that you want to discuss, or any kind of meta stuff about what we're doing here, what will be the next steps, I will save this now and give you guys the chance to give any comments.
I don't know whether it fits in economy or whether it better fits in somewhere like household decisions or whatever, but advertising and the effects of advertising on individuals.
So this would be, this definitely belongs into families, and the whole mechanism of favorite suppliers. I would like to. I will just take a note. So, should link to, I think, households, family. Let me check my folder structure, and I will just create a really quick note there to capture that. And if you have any thoughts on it, let me know already.
I have one meta question, and I'm not sure if this makes any sense, but the question whether Citybound is consistent with reality, or if it's consistent with its own reality. For example, with advertisement, if there isn't any advertisement, if there isn't any billboards in Citybound, then you wouldn't factor in advertising as an effect. But if you want to be consistent with reality, of course you'd have to implement the effects of advertisement.
Well, this is one concrete example, and in this case I feel like there should be advertisement just because of how much of a visual characteristic of real cities it is. And at the same time, like, there is already this mechanism of families having favorite suppliers, and these need to be updated somehow, and it could be just like some hidden thing that you're not really aware of. But wouldn't it be if like the actual billboards in the city would influence the families in your city?
And wouldn't it be cool if that was a tool businesses could use to get more customers? So it goes both ways, both in the effect and in the creation.
Yeah.
And then an advertising agency is an entire business you can have in the city.
That's a good point.
But okay. Sorry?
Sorry, I guess that would go into the real estate market. So an advertising agency owns billboards around the city.
Yeah, it's the same kind of thing, more or less. But I feel like I didn't really answer your meta question, because like what other aspects for you are important there?
I don't know, actually. I was just thinking, like, I don't know. I guess it was just sort of a brain bubble thought. Like, suddenly you have a lot of factors that affect an economy that could be improved. But I suppose.
Well, I'd draw an analog or a metaphor between racing games. That there are some that are very simulation heavy. They're recreations of real driving and real cars, and every minutiae of detail that comes with that. And then there's some that are more arcadey, fun, crazy, cars flying off the walls, indestructibility, whatever. And there's games that will fall anywhere in a spectrum along there. But it tends to be a difference between realism and fun. And in the same way, city sims have to balance between realism and fun.
Not quite sure I agree with that. And the kind of extra dimension that I would want to give to it is that, of course, there is this extreme trade-off between hyper-realism and fun that you mentioned. But I think if I inspect how I feel about existing city building games, what is part for me of fun is the feeling of awakeness and aliveness, and real, and being a real city that my cities evoke is a big part of my fun. And
is it that it feels like a real city, or that it feels like an alive city? Because I don't think any city sim ever creates a real city.
okay, let's say in a live city, and for me, having advertisement billboards in the city would contribute greatly to that feeling, actually, like maybe surprisingly so. Just as an example, just as having like an airport, I mean, that's a personal thing, but an airport where planes more or less realistically do their thing, and which is not just like a 200 by 500 meter square. That would just seeing that happening would, I don't know, evoke this feeling of watching a really well done model train, maybe something like that.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm hinting at?
Well,
And
I mean,
think,
I was thinking earlier that, like, for example, we could model stormwater systems and we could have flooding when it rains, but that's not particularly fun. City Skylines modeled noise pollution, but that didn't really contribute to the game other than being an annoyance. There are things that are definitely real that aren't fun.
that's true, and that's a good point, and I think we will just have to see for each of them. Like, again, for each of them, there's even people who are super interested in that and who might want to implement something like noise pollution as a mod.
And then there are people who aren't, Inga.
Yeah, I mean,
it's
it's
also a matter.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think it's
Go
also
ahead.
a matter of like when you introduce a problem and have no way to solve it, it takes away from the fun. It's like the noise pollution in city skylines doesn't really add much because there's not really anything you do with it other than like don't put a house next to a concert venue.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, and yeah, first what Chokma said in the chat. Hi, by the way, that all of that is stuff after the main game loop and the really essentials of what makes a city building game. That's true. And again, I think all of these systems can make the game feel more real and more alive, but you have to be able to actually interact with them meaningfully. And just my naive feeling is that actually for all of these problems, including flooding, I think if you really try, you can invent a fun way to implement them. If it's just the case where like noise pollution, where you can't really do anything, then why even have it, of course?
I think perhaps there's also value in fine-tuning the degree to which these systems affect each other. So like in city skylines, the noise pollution is either not a problem or the citizens are sick and dying of terrible plague. There's no
actually
degree.
Dying from noise.
Yes.
The
They
rock
literally
concert
die
plague.
from noise. Or even just being next to, like, sometimes just a commercial building will set it off. It's like, oh, I live next to a shopping mall. Oh no, I'm dead of plague. I think that's probably actually where more of the frustration comes, is that the degree is not anywhere near realistic.
Yeah.
Another game that had no realism but was supposed to be fun but was absolutely not fun was Tilted Mills SimCity Societies.
I'm ashamed to say I
unrealistic.
never
It was
played
super
SimCity
cartoony.
Societies.
I think I remember playing that, actually. Is it where you have like the different social classes, or like not even classes, but like almost like here's the hipsters and here's the businessy people, and they each live in their own neighborhood and have different needs and so on?
No, that's Monte Cristo City Life.
Ah,
City
yeah,
Skylines
then-
was like building your plopping everything. There was no zoning. We had to plop everything. You had like society points. Like, are you like a fun, cartoony city? Or are you an authoritarian city, or a spooky city, or a capitalist city, or a industrial robber baron city, or what was it, cyberpunk? And they all had different like themes with different music and different skies and different streets and props. But it wasn't fun at all. It was very boring.
I feel like for that game, the first couple of minutes were quite fun. But it has some redeeming qualities, and it also has some simplicities. And then also, I just enjoy plopping. I think that the feeling of a plop is quite nice, but I know that's not what we're doing. But that sort of interaction of the sound, it's like poof.
Yeah, I'm going to need some great sound design for the actual planning and zoning, especially because it's like less physical than plopping something or like plopping a road, right? But I think if I go for the like pencil-y kind of sounds, that can still feel kind of great. Just as a complete side note. Okay, let me see if I missed anything in chat. Yeah, maybe just let me think if you enjoyed doing this during the stream. I feel like we wrote down a lot of stuff and it's immensely helpful, definitely for me. I mean, it's not just about the text which we wrote down, but actually a lot of things feel clarified for me. And I might want to do that more often. Or did you prefer like the previous, much more open-ended kind of pattern scoring? But then again, we always talked about quite definitive topics anyways. Yeah, just let me know your thoughts.
I think that combining this with a monthly schedule is a really, really good idea, that we can, a few months in advance, sit down and actually plan out what is going on and break down the game chunks at a time.
That's cool to hear. And one of the motivations for the design document also for me is it's much easier to create tasks based on looking at the document, seeing what's missing, and then choosing like one area that I want to focus on for a month, for example, as compared to I have to kind of search through all of the things in my head that I wanted to do, and it just becomes much more explicit. So this is how the two relate also. Any other thoughts?
I think a monthly schedule is very good.
Cool. And I feel like it will just like either managing or struggling or not managing that will educate all of us in how difficult different things are, because I have definitely been completely off the mark on a lot of things, and it's even more difficult to explain to people why certain things take a long time, for example. But yeah. Jagger the Leo says, I just want to start closing tickets and get programming. Whatever gets us there faster, I'm on board with. Yeah, amazing. This is the actually biggest motivation for the game design document, that hopefully it at some point describes Citybond, or at least some aspects of it, in so much detail that the tasks which I define based on that can actually be done by someone else. And this is kind of a huge effort that I'm trying to do on the side as well. So if you look at my projects here in GitHub, part of the October prototype is also to have the first version of the design doc complete, where I feel like a lot of most topics are mentioned at least. I probably won't manage to add as much detail to everything as we managed to already add today, but to have something that I can actually present to people, to contributors, to people who have an idea or who ask about something that gets asked about often. And yeah, I hope this will work out. Let's see. Chokma asks, how did your multiplayer demo time synchronize the pathfinding requests over the network? So in this demo, I was cheating a little bit, but not because I was forced to. All of the cars and roads were actually on one computer. The only reason for that is that I didn't figure out how to make a plan, build some roads on one computer and some on the other computer quickly enough. They could actually be on different computers. Like even the lanes of an individual road could be on different computers. And the way the pathfinding works is it's not at all the traditional kind of pathfinding that does a pathfinding request once and then the car remembers where it needs to go. But each car actually just carries along with it the destination where it wants to end up. And then each road in the network knows the next turn towards this destination. So it's all kind of distributed. And this is why it also seamlessly works over network, because yeah, the car just needs to know I need to go right here, and the road to the right might already live on another computer, and then it just continues there. If that answers your question. Okay, then thank you all very much for joining. I'd like to wrap it up here. It was, again, a lot of fun. We were a lot of people. I guess weekends are really good. I can't always do that, but I will try. And see you hopefully in a Patron's Calling, and before that should already be the release of the prototype. So let's hope that I will manage everything, or the most important things, in time.
Okay, thank you for hosting this again.
And thank you also for so many people calling this time. I'm always honestly kind of afraid if it becomes too many people, if I will manage to hold the conversation, but I think we're all polite enough for that to work. So thanks to you as well. Take care, everyone, and see you all soon. Bye.
Bye.
Time to go back to sleep.